that sort of, it doesn't even necessarily have to be endless, but just that feeling of like, oh, I could explore this forever if I wanted to. And obviously you don't want to because you want to make the thing. But, just that sense of like, this can be anything that we want it to be.
Absolutely.
We're onto that sort of anime style, traditional drawing animation style. With
the industry is going back to the old trends. You're right.
Yes, exactly. And I find for me that's great.
You're gonna have a lot of opportunities again.
Oh yes, exactly. That's what I'm hoping for. If you're pulling from AI, you are pulling the lowest common denominator, almost by definition. It is the aggregate. It is pulling from everything. So
yes,
you're not going to get that sort of like, oh, here's a surprise that I wasn't even thinking of in terms of my own experience.
Hello and welcome to Prolific Perspectives. This is Kamal Hassan, your host and founder of Prolific Animation Studio. We are all about exploring innovation, entrepreneurship, and how to be successful. Today we have an amazing guest with us, an animator, director, Paul Zito. Hey Paul, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing, Kamal?
Pretty good. Pleasure to have you with us today. So Paul, give your brief introduction to our audience so they'll know more about you.
Yeah, sure. So I actually got started in music, as you could probably tell. I'm a musician. Around 15 or 16, I taught myself the drums, started learning guitar, piano, bass, just pretty much anything I could get my hands on. I started teaching myself. Was recording my own songs, slowly started getting into music composition, scoring films for friends who were working in films, which was then sort of my introduction into the whole visual medium. A buddy of mine put a camera in my hands and I just was immediately transfixed on that whole, relationship of capturing something and having it come up on screen. And from there, I just got really deep into film and started watching as much as I could. And that led to a very deep obsession with Wes Anderson. And as soon as he came out with Fantastic Mr. Fox, I got completely consumed by that. The way the fur boils on the characters and just the whole textural direction and the creative direction that he has really enthralled me, and the attention to detail was something that I really related to. So that just propelled me into stop motion. Basically, from that point on, I was into animation. This would be around 19 or 20 probably.
Great.
And I just got so enveloped with stop motion. I did anything I could to, borrow cameras. I got my parents to give me my old Lego sets to start my first little short films and all that. So I just deep dive into that as much as I could. And that eventually led to doing music videos for friends, meeting more people who were in my industry. I then eventually, to make it short, I got hired by some friends in a small boutique studio called Mothlight Creative that was based out of Pittsburgh at the time.
Great.
They brought me in and taught me 2D animation, VFX, more live action stuff. I then also was, still scoring for them a little bit, doing some music, but then that also led into me learning sound design and, how to put together a full project, from designing the sounds to mixing it and adding the music. And then from there, I kind of decided, I wanted to be more direct with my own sort of creative journey. So that was my first real step into freelance. That would have been about 10 years ago or so. And it's been freelance ever since. My beginning freelance was very audio focused, but I knew I wanted to be an animator and a director. So it was just a lot of side projects until I slowly started moving out of the audio, escaped professionally and into just full-time animation. And I also
what was your biggest turning point in your journey as an animator, and a moment when you felt like you truly belonged in this field?
I would have to say, like, when did the imposter syndrome leave, basically? I would have to say it would probably be somewhere around the short film that I made with my friends after I left Mothlight. So we had like a 3.5 year stop motion animation short film that we worked on. Very dedicated, intense, sort of creative collaboration with friends. We were all insane. We would work all day, and then we would go to the studio at night and work until
Mm-hmm.
3 o'clock in the morning, making little
Wow.
armatures move. Um, so I think once we sort of went through the trenches together with that, it kind of removed any sort of like, oh, I'm not an animator. It's like, well, I've blood, sweat, and tears into this project at this point. If I'm not an animator, then I don't know, who is. Um, so I
Mm-hmm.
think that really kind of solidified that identity for me. I'm still a musician. I still
Mm-hmm.
love audio. I still do sound design here and there. I think that'll
Mm-hmm.
always be a part of my identity. But really, that project, and then also once I sort of shifted my clientele away from audio and solely into animation, and it was like,
So,
all right, this
can
is
you please share insights of that project, a story, and how you just mentioned it took you 3.5 years to produce that project? So, what was
yeah.
the storyline?
Yeah, so my buddy Justin, he
Mm-hmm.
had a sort of we all had a to keep it brief, we had a kind of deconversion process from our very conservative Christian upbringing. So the story is kind of a allegory of that, of finding truth and trying to understand
Mm-hmm.
what your belief system is. It's about a 10-minute short film. It's like a robot dystopian,
Mm-hmm.
a little adventure. Um, and it was something that we all believed in because we all liked the story, or we all liked the intention behind the story. And honestly, we're all very uh, just very intense creative people when it comes to uh, you know believing in the fine details, making up a whole grand picture. So we're all just very invested and
So, you just
kind of
mentioned
a bunch of
about
passionate
belief
driven.
system. Is that religious
Yes.
belief, or is it like believe in
Yeah.
yourself kind of a thing?
I think it was the deconversion would have been a religious
Mm-hmm.
paradigm into a sort of self belief, taking
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily saying like, oh, this idea is bad or wrong, but sort of these
Mm-hmm.
systems that humans built around certain ideas, you can kind of get suckered into, or
Mm-hmm.
they can take agency away from you. And the moral being, hey, sometimes you have to do the thing yourself. It's
Yeah.
up to you. And don't just throw things at the foot of some congregation and hope it gets better.
Mm-hmm.
Put in the work and uh, you know try to resolve whatever problems you're having yourself, or at least move towards that. um so it's a very I guess self-assuring, you know motivating kind of story.
Okay, great. So, you have worked with big names like Marvel and Coldplay. If you were tasked with creating an animated superhero or music themed movie, what would be your unique twist?
If I was tasked with that, oh man, I mean, you know the the recent Spider-Man animations probably kind of took
Hmm.
some of the direction that I would have gone in. I probably would want to do some sort of hybrid of 2D and stop motion, because I
Okay.
find that combination to be fascinating. There's a lot
Hmm.
in there that you can sort of explore, and the fact that they both work in this sort of frame by frame world, they blend very well and uniquely together. I've done plenty of work with combining those two things before, and you can just find interesting chemistry in those things. And you can also be hyper stylized, which is what I think things
That's
like.
also a possibility. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Which is honestly what drew me to animation entirely in the first place. Going back to the Wes Anderson influence, just seeing how specific those choices, the color palettes, the textures, the character
Hmm.
design, all those things, you could be so specific and make such a complete world that you don't really have a reference for. Obviously, the people making that have references in their head from other things, but as a viewer, you're just watching this thing being completely taken by this unique chemistry
Hmm.
of uh, of artistic influence and direction. And yeah, that I think that above all else, I'm a fan of the MCU for the most part. Everyone will say this, but pre-Endgame,
Hmm.
MCU, I'm still a big fan of. Um,
Uh-huh.
and I love a lot of the things that they've done in there, but really the standouts for me are when they take really, ballsy risks and push things to interesting extremes. I thought WandaVision was fascinating, just the whole
Mhm.
concept of moving through decades of TV I thought was interesting. So anything that really sort of spins something on its head and
Mhm.
presents it in a new, fresh way, I think that would be
I
my
would agree with
direction.
you on this. So,
Yeah.
working with Marvel and Hasbro means catering to massive fan expectations. What's the
Mhm.
pressure like, and how do you stay creative under it?
It's tough. I would say, you know, there's a system in place. It's not like you're
Hmm.
working with a smaller studio with just one person to kind of report to. You
Yeah.
have multiple chains of executives that you don't even necessarily talk to. You just know are there and
Hmm.
looking at the things that you're making. Um, it's There is some creativity in it. It's not like it's totally devoid of creativity, but I will say there are, unless that's something that's decided at the head of the project where they're giving you full reins, there are quite a bit of restraints in terms of what you can do. You kind of have to make sure you slot in, and in some cases that's nice. I don't want to sound like that's a negative thing because
Uh-huh.
playing in the sandbox is sometimes what grants you a lot of creativity and a lot of exploration. You need those parameters to make sense. Otherwise, you just kind of run wild, and sometimes it's just a mess.
Makes sense. And
Um,
on what projects you have worked with Hasbro?
so that was I directed a short. It was sort of a commercial short film hybrid. This would have been around the
Hmm.
Homecoming era.
Hmm.
So there was a Spider-Man action figure toy that came out, and they wanted to do like a promotion for it, but also tell a story with it. So they had storyboards already kind of figured out, a rough animatic, and we had
Hmm.
to tweak that based on how the actual action figure could function and find
Okay.
some find some liberties with that. Um, but yeah, it was an interesting process. It's something that I'm glad that I did, but as a whole, I still prefer sitting down
Hmm.
with my pencil and coming up with ideas. That's my happy place.
Great,
Yeah,
great. So, as a freelancer over a decade, what's the most surprising lesson
yeah.
you have learned about the animation industry?
Most surprising lesson. I don't know if this was necessarily surprising, but it's something that took me a long time to learn. Would
Hmm.
be just the level of persistence that's required. you
Hmm.
know e- Even going into this, I knew freelancers and people would give me advice, and even I give advice too to people who randomly will message me on social, or people I know who are thinking about getting into freelance, and you can tell them, and I certainly heard when I was starting that
Hmm.
um it's hard, you got to keep going, don't give up, all these things. But you don't really understand that until you've gone through the depths of despair for the
I would
100th
agree with you
time.
on this.
you
Yes.
know
Hmm.
yeah, it's very, you can't teach that. That's something that you have to just sort of experience and develop the thick skin yourself. And it just comes with time, and you have to be willing to take that rejection, and sometimes not even take rejection, just take radio silence, just take pure no response at all, over and over again, to just realize, okay, this is the game. It's not that
It is.
I'm bad, or that I'm doing something wrong necessarily. This is just how it's played, and I need to not take it personally. I need to not let it ruin my day. I need to still do something today, and just sort of kind of get back on the horse. So, yeah, that's again, no matter how many times you tell that to someone or hear that from someone, it's no replacement for actually experiencing that thing.
That makes sense, and I would agree with you on
Yeah.
this. So, working on commercials for brands like Nike and Lego must have been
Mm.
exciting. And what's the creative process like when animating for such globally recognized names?
Yeah, I mean, it's cool. Lego, I think, in particular, I mentioned my first stop motions were with the Legos I grew up with. So
Hmm.
there's a very deep sort of emotional, nostalgic connection to that sort of thing. And you also want to make sure that you're um, doing honor to the product as well, because other people have that feeling as well. I still recently got one of my friends sent me a 700-piece Lego set to build. So it's
Oh.
still something that even people in my age range are enjoying to a certain
Hmm.
extent. Um, and so there's a responsibility there. You want to make sure that you're bringing the nostalgia that you have into the project, because that I think that enhances the end product, and also yeah, just sort of makes you sleep a little bit better at night, knowing that you know
Uh,
gave back to something that gives you so much. Yeah, so Lego is something that I still hold very near and dear to my heart. um,
mhm.
Nike would be, it's such a global product. It's kind of hard to, that's something where I try not to think about that too
Okay.
much. Like how
Hmm.
big am I, going with this? Who am I trying to please? Um,
Hmm.
they have so many different campaigns and different styles, and different people that they're targeting. It's for that. I think it's really just about finding what the target audience is for the project you're working on, and making the people who pick that target audience happy. It's really just about, hey, what do you want? Let me just achieve that to the maximum that I can.
So if I were to talk about to being, if we would talk about if you could direct your own animated feature film, what genre
Yeah.
would it be, and what would be the story focus on?
Yeah, I think, well, I'm always writing and working on something of that kind.
Okay.
Right now, I would like, the thing that I'm working on right now is more in the short, but we're hoping to pitch it and turn it into something more feature length.
Hmm.
Um, and it's going to be a sort of sci-fi fantasy um, blend of
And that's the trend as
underwater
well,
and
because I
spaceship.
was, we are also
Yes.
getting into a long form content side, and we are also
Yeah.
making a combination of action, sci-fi, futuristic,
Yes.
a lot
Yeah.
of things. So, mhm.
There's so much to explore in that landscape, right? Like it's it's a broad umbrella. So I know I'm not really giving any specifics right now, but there's just, you can, especially in animation, again, to go back to this idea of just being able to do anything, to really open up your creative possibilities. Um, you
Because there
know,
are infinite possibilities. You can do anything. You can get into
absolutely,
anything. Yeah, absolutely.
you're setting the rules for the universe. Okay, well, what era is this? Does the era even matter? Can it just be a
Yeah,
nondescript era that we pull some old stuff and blend some new stuff in? Do we want
why
futuristic
not?
retro? Like what is, and what does that look like? What kind of retro? It's just all of these things that you get to play around with in the ideation process. So yeah, for me, it's probably some blend of that. I've always been a sci-fi fan. I mean, I grew up with Star Wars,
Uh-huh.
and Star Trek, and I'm a big fan of like Interstellar and those kinds of films. So I think sci-fi will always be sort of the broad paintbrush that I choose to pick up. But I love a good fantasy element. I love some space wizards. Things that get
Uh-huh.
kind of wacky, have some comedic relief in there probably too. But I'm
Hmm.
also a huge fan of things like the John Wick series, with really well coordinated and thoughtful action. Set pieces
Yes.
that really make you sort of
Hmm.
go, "Wow, I can't believe, I have no idea how they thought of this, let alone pulled this off."
And it
So
actually blows up your
combinations of that.
mind. You're right. You're right.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
Hmm.
again, things that that's another series that just takes the formula and puts it on its head in so many ways, and you kind of don't understand what you're watching at first, because there's so much attention to detail, there's so much depth there. And for me, when I saw that series for the first time, I wasn't even really that big of an action fan, and this turned me into one. I was like, oh my gosh, there's a depth here I didn't even know existed. So really anything like that provides that sort of it doesn't even necessarily have to be endless, but just that feeling of like, oh, I could explore this forever if I wanted to. And obviously you
Hmm.
don't want to because you want to make the thing, but
Hmm.
just that sense of like this can be anything that we want it to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the most enticing for me for sure.
And I've been watching, Arcane. The season 2 is about to
Great,
finish,
great show.
and
Yeah,
oh
I
my
can't
god,
wait.
what a
I can't
concept!
wait. I know. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I would put that up there. I'll put Scavenger's Reign up there. There's stuff that Gendy, I'm going to butcher his last name like I always do, but Gendy Tartakovsky, who did Samurai Jack and Primal. Primal is one of my all-time favorite shows. Yeah, those kind of shows that are just put you in, and that's a great example of putting you in a sort of an era that but also changing the rules, turning
Yes.
it into a fantasy in a way
Hmm.
that makes you go, okay, this is familiar, but also there are things happening that defy,
Hmm.
natural laws here. So we're also in no man's land as well. We're exploring new possibilities. So yeah, I really, anything that really sort of takes that imagination, just runs with it. Yeah, I'm a sucker for that.
Great. So, are there any unique challenges or pressures that comes with animating for household names compared to working on TV shows on passion projects?
Yeah, I mean, it's a broadly, I would say it's a difference of who you're trying to please, right? So you're
Hmm.
always trying to please a uh, if you're doing something like a household name that everybody knows, you're almost certainly trying to please people you're never going to meet unless you're at the top of the line, directing
Hmm.
something or producing something. If you're just animating on a project, you're probably never going to talk to the people you're trying to make happy.
I would agree with you.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so there's a long chain there of
Hmm.
of playing this game of okay, I have the person that I'm submitting shots to, I want to make happy, but I also need to make sure that this doesn't keep coming back to me. So I have to think about the person ahead of them too a little bit. So there's kind of this game of, who am I pleasing in this landscape? When I'm
Hmm.
working on passion projects, I'm just trying to please myself. I'm just trying to find what makes myself happy, both from a
Hmm.
selfish reason because that's what I enjoy doing. That's what got me into this, but also
Hmm.
because I think that is ultimately what resonates with an audience the most. If you're not bringing forward your own personal experience and the things that make you happy, you're not going to relate to an audience. If you
To
if you're
the
just
audience,
sitting there thinking,
absolutely.
yeah, if you're just thinking, okay, what is this person going to think of this? Okay, I shouldn't do this because what if person B thinks this is bad? You're never going to finish the thing, or you're going to make something that's so bland and uninspired that no one's going to care anyway.
Hmm.
So I think the best thing to do for personal projects is to really just tap into what inspires you. um, get very personal with it, as personal as you can with it, and that's not a formula for success. It's not that,
Yeah.
oh my
Hmm.
god, it's just going to resonate because you made it super personal, but that I
Hmm.
think is the best chance that you have to make something resonate. The pieces that
Hmm.
I've made that have done the best either on social or wherever is because
Hmm.
I was able to bring something deeply personal to that project as well. So
Hmm.
there's a part of you in it, and also that makes it more rewarding to work on too. It's sort of cathartic, it's therapeutic, right? Like,
Yeah.
you go through something, you bring some sort of lived experience into it.
Hmm.
um, it just makes it more meaningful to you long term, and it makes the whole process, I think, more
And it has to be
rewarding.
meaningful. You're right.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So some animators, I'm gonna get down to AI and a lot of
Yes, I knew this was
I
coming.
would say.
Yeah.
So some animators worry about that AI generated art
Yep.
lacks the emotional depth of hand drawn or human crafted animation. Do you
Yes,
think this
right.
gap will ever close?
That's a good question. I think that it will close. I don't think it will ever be a one-to-one. I think the gap will get smaller, but I don't think it will close in that it will be the exact same thing. And the reason I say that is
Hmm.
there is, kind of what I was just saying, there's an inherent value to putting your own time and energy into something, because it's not just you sitting there wasting time or burning, hours.
Mm-hmm.
you're drawing from what I think is your unique point of experience that is both intentional and unintentional. So you're the
Mm-hmm.
thing, you have a direction, you're trying to follow, you're trying to make something, but also
Mm-hmm.
influences that you're not even aware of are feeding through your mind. But in
Mm-hmm.
reality, that's only going to be so wide. It's only going to be the things that you've lived and you've experienced. So it's unique in that way, right?
It is.
Whereas if you're pulling from AI, you are pulling the lowest common denominator, almost by definition. It is the
Mm-hmm.
aggregate. It is pulling from everything. So
Yes.
you're not going to get that sort of like, oh, here's a surprise that I wasn't even thinking of in terms of my own experience. Like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
this influence that something from the Batman animated series that I grew up with just came out of me, and I don't even
Ah.
wasn't even thinking that. And oh,
Uh-huh.
isn't that cool? And
Mm-hmm.
now I can explore that and push that harder and find more of myself to put into something.
Mm-hmm.
um, you're just not going to get that. It's not the same experience where you're typing in some ideas and then just seeing what results come to you. um, that being said, there are scenarios where I've seen it work really well. I'm someone who has a huge amount of critiques towards AI,
Oh,
but I
okay.
do also think that it's there is a lane for it. There's I don't know if you know the band The Smile, but it's
Mm-hmm.
a side project from Tom York and Johnny Greenwood. They put
Mm-hmm.
out a new album fairly recently, and there were a bunch of music videos, sort of music video visualizer hybrids,
Mm-hmm.
um, that came out with it. And there was one in particular that I just loved immediately. It was so strange. It was like
Oh.
being inside a computer in the
Mm-hmm.
90s. And I
Wow.
think that was the intent. It felt very um, yeah, but both foreign and familiar at the same time, and it blended so well with the music. It was perfect. So naturally, I
Mm-hmm.
was like, okay, who made this? How did they make this? And then I found
Mm-hmm.
out it was one person who used a combination of computer programming and AI generated images. And in that
Oh.
instance, at first I was like, oh, okay, interesting. So that's not something that I would have thought of to make, but also it's
Mm-hmm.
so unique to this concept of feeling like you're in a computer, feeling like you're in a
Mm-hmm.
system. And
Mm-hmm.
you know what? This is the surreal sort of tone and texture that you get with AI that works perfectly with the message this song is trying to send. So I
Mm-hmm.
think when it's in its lane, when it's doing something that really I can only imagine AI doing, then I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, cool, give us something new, give us something weird and interesting. Like I'm totally down for that. It's really more when it
Mm-hmm.
starts to infringe
Mm-hmm.
on, hey, you don't have to draw things anymore. It's like, well, what if I want to? You know what I mean? Um,
Uh-huh.
so yeah, it's just it's trying to find where I think it's useful, and there are areas where I would like to see it excel. And so that's an area where I think it could close the gap, where we can't quite get to that sort of surreal inside a computer feel by being a
Mm-hmm.
human better than an actual computer can. You know what I mean?
I
Um,
believe. Mm-hmm.
so yeah, there's areas for it, so I think exist, but yeah, just let me keep drawing, please.
Great. So, do you have any
Yeah.
favorite animated movie director or studio whose work you constantly revisit for inspirations?
Yeah, I mean, Gendy, of course, as I mentioned before, is a big one. Samurai Jack was always massive influence for me. Batman the Animated Series was a massive influence for
Mm-hmm.
me.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the Avatar series, the Last Airbender series, was a big influence for me. For films, I mean, Miyazaki,
Avatar
of
is a big
course.
influence on everybody. Everybody in
Oh,
the entire
it's
industry.
so
It
huge.
is.
I mean, I
It is.
still rewatch those episodes and get choked up right at the end. Every time, a big
Mm-hmm.
lump in my throat. It's so good.
Uh-huh.
The music, the acting, the animation, the fight choreography. I mean, it's
It's a
just
complete
everything is a
package.
masterclass.
Everything is perfect. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, 100%, totally agree.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but Miyazaki is a massive influence for me too.
Mm-hmm.
I love pretty much everything that he's done, with a few
Mm-hmm.
exceptions, stranger exceptions. But for the most
Mm-hmm.
part, I'm a pretty big Miyazaki fan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I love living in those worlds that just sort of just feel so expansive. Any director that really sort of
Mm-hmm.
takes the medium to another level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to be that. you know.
Great. So, what are some upcoming trends in 2D animation you're most excited about?
Yeah, I would say, it's almost kind of going back to the original in some ways. Um, I'm really interested in, well, it saddens me to see that Scavenger's Reign isn't getting a second season because I think it deserves so much more awards and attention than it got because it's
Mm-hmm.
truly a beautiful and masterfully told story and well designed
Mm-hmm.
animation. But that
Mm-hmm.
is, they kind of did what I want to do or what I'm trying to do right now, which is, take still use technology obviously to its advantages where you can, but take
Mm-hmm.
some traditional 2D drawn, fine line animation,
Mm-hmm.
really masterfully illustrated backgrounds, and see what you can do with modern technology in that. What's the blend of that? I think it's sort of it's taken a long time for the industry to sort of come back around to that sort of anime style, traditional drawn
Yeah.
animation style, with
The
modern
industry, the
technology.
industry
Because you
is
got
going back to the old trends. You're right.
yes, exactly, and I find for me that's great. That's what I'm really
You're
excited.
going to have a lot of
Um,
opportunities again.
Oh yes, exactly. That's what I'm hoping for. And even, to a certain extent, we're talking AI. I think there will be a little bit of a hunger for that, or at least that's my hope, is that people um, will want some of that hand drawn feel to it. And stop motion has a lot of that too. Part of the reason I
Absolutely.
love the fur boil on
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic Mr. Fox is those are the hands of the animator.
Mm-hmm.
And without breaking the illusion of the story, it gives you that human element to it, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
this additional connection to the thing that you subconsciously feel. And I think
Mm-hmm.
2D animation is the same way. You
It
can
is.
have perfect movement and perfect lines and just have put a keyframe here, put a keyframe here, and have it, whatever you want to ease in, ease out, and
Mm-hmm.
make it do this perfect smooth line. And that's cool, and that works in a lot of circumstances. But
It
there's
is.
something
Mm-hmm.
else to,
Mm-hmm.
here I'm drawing this frame, I'm drawing this frame, and then I'm going to do every frame in between, and there's going to
Mm-hmm.
be some human oddities in there that give it this extra something.
Yeah.
And I
Mm-hmm.
find that to be special and interesting, and I'm glad to see that some studios, like The Line, is a great commercial studio, also does a lot of short film stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Golden Wolf is another one that does a lot of stuff like that too, where they integrate a traditional 2D drawn animation style into
Yes.
their work. They still do some 3D, and they find ways to sort of, bring the technology forward with it. Obviously, you have to be efficient. You can't just do everything on celluloid again.
And in fact, the
But
new trend is,
you know,
it's 2D, 3D combination, right? On
yes,
3D
yeah,
animation, they're applying 2D textures to give it a feel of
yes,
2D. So, and
right,
the greatest
exactly.
example, recent
Arcane
example is
does
Arcane. Arcane
right.
is a recent
Yeah,
example.
there it
Absolutely.
is. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and they do it masterfully as well. And it does this thing
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, okay, it's not 3D and it's not 2D, it's
2D.
somewhere in the middle, and it puts you in this nice, like,
Yeah.
in
Mm-hmm.
between realm that's unique
Mm-hmm.
to itself. And that's what I care about. Like, I want to find the alchemy, the chemistry in those
Yeah.
moments of like, okay, what's the blend? Because you go really hard 2D with a little bit of 3D, or if you go
Yeah.
really hard 3D with a little bit of 2D. And there's all the gradients in between that you can
Yes.
find that can make
Mm-hmm.
something unique. So yeah, I'm excited about that. I hope the industry keeps pushing that way, because that's just
Mm-hmm.
naturally where I want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And if it does, that would work out great for me.
Great, great. So,
Yeah.
thank you for tuning into another episode of Prolific Perspectives. We hope you enjoyed our insightful conversation with Paul. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Until next time.